والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the fiqh with روض المربع, the شرح وزاد المستقنع, and we stopped at the statement وصفة الغسل الكامل, وصفة الغسل الكامل, which is in page 153. Page 153, which is now is going to talk about how the details of making ghusl. And this is the ways of the ulama when it comes to the matters of fiqh, the wudu and ghusl. After mentioning the ghusl itself and the conditions and the pillars and so on, then afterwards talks about how in order or what's the way to do it, explaining the way to make the ghusl. So there's he's going to mention al-ghusl al-kamil and al-ghusl al-mujzi', the perfect ghusl and the ghusl that will be sufficing or sufficient for the obligation. So he says here, if we follow, we'll read few sentences from Zad. والغسل الكامل, we're reading only the red. والغسل الكامل أن ينوي. Again, if you're memorizing and we're memorizing Zad, don't memorize it from here because the tashkil is based on sharh. So you can't say والغسل الكامل. It's kasra based on what? So والغسل الكامل أن ينوي ثم يسمي ويغسل يديه ثلاثا وما لوثه ويتوضأ ويحثي على رأسه ثلاثا ترويه ويعم بدنه غسلا ثلاثا. And it continues. So now here adding the الشرح, he says وصفة الغسل الكامل. وصفة, الصفة is the description of الغسل الكامل or the complete ghusl, the صفة of it, how to make the ghusl in a complete way. He says أي المشتمل على الواجبات والسنن. So الغسل الكامل, the meaning of al-kamil, that it's perfect, it's complete. That means it includes the wajib and al-mustahab, the sunnah, the recommended. And once we, of course, learning the way the Prophet ﷺ, the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, they didn't used to exclude the sunan or the mustahabbat aside and say we were only going to do the fard. They would do what the Prophet ﷺ did. But the importance of knowing these rulings is for a person to know if he did something haram or not. Does the ghusl sufficient or not? Does he have to repeat it or not? As mentioned also with the wudu, and the same thing with the salah. So he says والغسل الكامل وصفة الغسل الكامل أي المشتمل على الواجبات والسنن أن ينوي. So the first thing النية, أن ينوي, that he would have the intention, and that's the present tense of النية. In the sharh he says أن ينوي رفع الحدث. What is the نية? The نية is رفع الحدث, to lift al-hadath, to lift the state that he has that would necessitate, made it as an obligation for him to make ghusl. So رفع الحدث أو استباحة الصلاة, or the نية can be استباحة الصلاة, استباحة from المباح, from the permissibility, so seeking the mubah, so to permit the salah. Person wants to make salah, that's why he's taking a shower or ghusl. أو نحوها, or the like of this. Say for example someone is making ghusl so that he can recite Quran. He's not able to because he's in state of janaba. And if he makes the ghusl for that, that is sufficient for the Quran and for the salah and for everything. And there are some details when it comes to the niyyah, what is exactly the person is making the niyyah for. But this is not here the context of talking about the differences of opinions. As it's going to be mentioned, if a person has the intention of رفع الحدث الأكبر, to lift the major hadath, which the janaba is as an example of it, that removes al-hadath al-asghar. It removes the minor hadath. That means a person can make salah. He does not have to make wudu if he make ghusl, because the ghusl is higher. So the higher takes over the lower one or the minor one. But there are some details to this, and But again here we follow that here for now for the time being. أن ينوي رفع الحدث أو استباحة الصلاة أو نحوها or the like of this. ثم يسمي, then to say بسم الله. ثم يسمي, يقول وهي ها هنا أو وهي هنا كوضوء. The tasmiyah here is like wudu. We said about the wudu before that it's obligatory if the hadith is sound. So it's like the wudu. تجب مع they have the تشكيل here الذكر, but it's more correct to say مع الذكر. With the dhamma comes with the remembrance, not مع الذكر like the dhikr of Allah. So that it's not like when, but it's still valid inshallah. So تجب مع الذكر or مع الذكر, meaning remembering. It becomes obligatory if he remembers it. وتسقط مع السهو. تسقط, that means it is not obligatory if a person forgets it. The same thing with wudu. And some said it's akad, it's more stressed than ghusl, the tasmiyah. تجب مع الذكر وتسقط مع السهو. Then ويغسل يديه ثلاثا. So after the niyyah and then saying Bismillah, and then يغسل يديه ثلاثا, washes his hand 3 times. Washes his hand 3 times. كما في الوضوء, as in the wudu. وهو هنا آكد, and it's here more stressed. لرفع الحدث عنهما بذلك. It's آكد here, why? Because in wudu, the first thing that a person do when washing the hands 3 times is this is not from the pillars of the wudu. There's no رفع of الحدث yet. But here in the ghusl is different. So this is different than washing the hands 3 times in wudu. This is why it's وهو هنا آكد, more stressed. لرفع الحدث عنهما بذلك, because it lifts both حدث when a person washes it. ويغسل ما لوثه من أذى ويتوضأ كاملا. And then after that يغسل, he washes ما لوثه, what he is التلوث is the contamination. What a person has doesn't have to be najasa, but removing the dirt, removing the impurities. But here, as a result of the janaba, for example, he would wash private parts and things like that. So this is what is meant by that. Min adha, from adha, harm, unpleasant things. So he starts with that, وَيَتَوَضَّأَ كَامِلًا, and then he makes wudu, complete wudu afterwards. And each one, it has, evidences in the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So wudu here, kamil, not all of the wudu except the foot. Some narration says this is yeah, and other narration says the wudu kamilan, the entire wudu. ويحثي الماء على رأسه ثلاثا ترويه. Then he يحثي, الحثو is to have a handful of water on the head 3 times. ترويه, that means to make it covers it all, to go basically to the roots. That's the tarwiyah means. This is turawi. Like when you irrigate the land, you don't just want for the water to touch the top of the plant. You want it to go to the bottom of it, not the roots that you would dig in the ground. Doesn't have to be this way, but meaning the bottom of it. So turawi, that means to the bottom of the head, to the hair, the bottom of the hair. This is turawi. أي meaning أي يروي في كل مرة أصول شعره. So 3 times, and this is the method, 3 times to be done, and in each time he would make sure that يروي, the water reaches the usul, the foundation of his hair. With his hands he would make this, he would make sure that the water reaches the root of his hair. لحديث عائشة, because of the hadith of عائشة رضي الله عنها. كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم, the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم, كان إذا اغتسل من الجنابة, whenever he would make ghusl from الجنابة, غسل يديه ثلاثا, washes his hand 3 times, وتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة, then he makes wudu of the salah. ثم يخلل شعره بيديه. يخلل, we talked about the تخليل before, means he put his hand in his hair to reach the skull or the bottom of the hair 3 times. بيديه. ثم يخلل شعره بيديه, with his hands. Did not mention 3 times. حتى إذا ظن أنه قد روى بشرته, till he thinks that he had made the bashara, which is the skin of the head, which is the basically not the hair but the bottom of it, till he thinks that he had made it with water. أفاض الماء عليه 3 مرات, then he would pour water on him 3 times. ثم غسل سائر جسده, then he would wash the rest of his body. And the hadith is متفق عليه. So ويحثي على رأسه 3 ترويه ويعم بدنه غسلا, then he covers, يعم, covers all of his body, غسلا, washing, being washed. فلا يجزئ المسح. المسح is not مجزئ. If someone wipes a part of his body, then the ghusl is not valid. It's not valid unless the entire body is covered with water, meaning with ghusl, that means the water runs. And as it's going to be mentioned, ويدلكه, تدليك removes all the waswas, meaning to rub one's self, but as it's going to be mentioned inshallah. فلا يجزئ المسح. المسح, it invalidates the ghusl. 3, to wash the body 3 times. حتى ما يظهر, so the entire body, even as he says, حتى ما يظهر من فرج امرأة عند قعود لحاجة. Even the things that are covered or not shown, but when a person sits, it appears. Like the private part, he says, من فرج امرأة, if she sits. لحاجة, if she sits for a reason. So that means not the inside of it, but the outside. But the outside that shows if she sits. وباطن شعر, and the inside of الشعر, the inside part of the hair. So this is the reason why it's 3 times. And the things that are, as it's going to be mentioned also, the things that are hidden to be washed. وتنقضه لحيض ونفاس. The hair, assuming of course many women, their hair is long, so she has to undo the braids for the haid and the nifas. So the haid is once a month. So when she's taken the ghusl once a month for the haid and she has her hair in braids, she has to undo that. But if she's making the ghusl of janaba, she doesn't have to undo the braids. Ghusl al-janaba, it's enough that she just pour 3 handfuls of water on her head without undoing the braids. And there's a hadith about this. But with al-hayd wal-nufas, then she undo the braids if she has braids. Because the ghusl has to cover all of the body. But there's this exception for the women in janaba for the hair, not the men. He says, وَيَدْلُكَهُ, وَيَدْلُكَهُ. This is also something that is recommended here in the ghusl. الدلك. الدلك is to rub. So the rule is to wash, and while it's coming down pouring and the water is running, then he covers it with his hand when it rubs all over the different parts of the body. He mentioned here in the sharh, these specifically the places where the water might not reach if a person pour water on himself from the top or the sides. He says, يَدْلُكَ بَدَنَهُ بِيَدَيْهِ. He rubs his body with his hands, with his 2 hands. Why? لِيَتَيَقَّنَ وُصُولَ الْمَاءِ, to make sure, to have certainty that the water reaches مَغَابِنِهِ, إلى مغابنه وجميع بدنه. المغابن is the hidden parts of the body. It comes from it also al-ghabn. Al-ghabn is when someone is cheated, and it's based on someone is given less. So it comes from the things that are hidden. So ليتيقن وصول الماء إلى مغابنه. So this is the maghaben under his arm, things like this. And he mentioned some of it. وجميع بدنه, and the rest of his body. ويتفقد أصول شعره. So يتفقد, to make sure, going after the usul, the roots of his hair. وغضاريف أذنيه, and the grooves, غضاريف, of his ears. To make sure, he put his finger in his ears one time like that, to make sure that the water reaches in the back of his ears. وتحت حلقه, and under his throat. وإبطيه, and under his armpits, under the arm, because also to make sure with the hands. All of that is by, normal thing when a person takes a shower, is not just pouring water on himself and that's it. He would use his hands to make sure that the water reached all of his body to the best of his ability. وعمق سرتي, and the surra, the belly button, to make sure that it gets the water in it. But don't put the hose in there, but it's just to make sure that it's not neglected. Yeah. وبين إليتيه, and the bottom, his back, basically, to make sure that the water reaches the back, the bottom back. وطي ركبتيه. طي is when you fold something. So the طي of his knees, so the back of the knees. And of course, not everybody would make ghusl with the shower. So if you make it from a bucket of water, that means you have to make sure that these things are covered with water. And the same thing if you do it from above with the hands, to make sure that the water reaches all of these places without waswas, without extremism, just at ease, which is the normal action that a person would do when he is in the shower. This is that is to be done with a dalk, which is with rubbing the hand over these places. He says ويتيامن. يتيامن, that means he starts with the right from اليمين, and the verb here يتيامن, that means he starts with the right. لأنه صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يعجبه التيامن في طهوره, because the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام used to like التيامن, to use the right always in his tuhur, in his purification. So after the niyyah and saying Bismillah, and then wudu, when the person is making wudu, the right first, of course, and then he put water on his head 3 times, and then the right side, and then the left side, so starts with the right. So always starts with the right. ويتيمم. ويغسل قدميه ثانيا مكانا آخر. Now after that, after he finishes the ghusl, he washes his foot, 2 foot, ثانيا, a second time, مكانا آخر, in a different, separate place. And there's some hadith where the Prophet ﷺ would wash his foot after he finishes. This is, it's to remember that. But if a person doesn't, the wudu is valid, or the ghusl is valid. And even some said if it's only to be done if the water is collected, because now the water becomes used. So the foot is immersed under the water that is collected. But if it's not collected, and the water is gone right away, so that means there's no need for him to wash his foot in a separate place. So the separate place, because the place that he's making ghusl in, his foot most likely to be covered with water, because the water is collected. But if it's not collected, then it's okay, can be in the same place. So in the different place is not amr ta'abbudi, it's not an act of worship. It has to be a different place. It's just a matter of making sure that the foot at the end gets fresh water. ويغسل قدميه ثانيا مكانا آخر. Then he says ويكفي الظن في الإسباغ. الإسباغ, which means to thoroughly to make the wudu or the ghusl full. What's sufficient in that is الظن, most likely that you covered the entire body. This is what الظن means, meaning you don't have to have the certainty with every atom of your body that reached water. Even some people, they quote the hadith that there is a janaba in every hair. This hadith is weak. So as long as, again, a person doing the best he can, he doesn't have to have an instrument to check that every hair the water reached and things like this. As mentioned, a person would do it the best he can without even excessiveness of water, because this is also forbidden. This is going to be mentioned at the end. قال بعضهم, some of them said, ويحرك خاتمه, and to move his khatam, his ring, to move it so that the water goes inside. ليتيقن وصول الماء, so that he has certainty that the water reached. So he doesn't have to take his ring off, he can keep it, but to move it so that the water, the same thing with wudu. He says al-mujzi. Now this is what's mentioned now is al-ghusl al-kamil. This is the perfect to complete ghusl. Al-ghusl al-mujzi. Al-mujzi is the minimum requirement. This is the sufficient ghusl. Ay al-kafi. If he does this, the ghusl is valid for him to make salah. He lifted the hadath from himself. How it's to be done? أن ينوي كما تقدم. So the niyyah also has to be there, of course, because if a person is making ghusl للتبرد, cool off, the habit, then it doesn't count. It has to be with the niyyah of ghusl as an act of ibadah to be able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ويسمي, and also to say Bismillah, فيقول بسم الله ويعم بدنه بالغسل مرة, and to cover the entire body, بدنه, بالغسل, with washing one time. This is the minimum requirement, but the entire body. He says أيغسل ظاهر جميع بدنه. That means he washes الظاهر, the outside part of all of his body, وما في حكمه, and what's in the same ruling of it. Meaning that, as mentioned before, also al-maghaben, the things that are hidden, من غير ضرر, من غير ضرر, without harm, to make sure that it's also washed, كالفم والأنف, like the mouth and the nose, والبشرة التي تحت الشعور, the skin under the hair, whether it's in the head or the beard, ولو كثيفة, even if the hair is thick. وباطن الشعر, and the bottom of the sha'r, or the other side of the sha'r. If someone hair is combed in one way and it's very sticking to his head, so the bottom is the inside part of the hair. So that means he has to make sure that he makes the water washes the entire hair. وظاهره, so the inside part of the hair, the outside part of the hair, مع مسترسله, with the mustarsal. Al-mustarsal is the hair that goes down, meaning long hair. So not just the hair that is on the head. If someone has a long hair, the long hair has to be washed. That's different than wudu. In wudu, you wipe over the head. You don't wash the head, you wipe the head and not the entire hair. If someone has a long hair, he doesn't have to wipe the hair, he just wipe the head back and forth, and that's sufficient. But for ghusl, the hair, if it's long, it has to be washed. وما تحت حشفة أقلف إن أمكن شمرها. As we said in the books, you would find all kinds of specific things to make sure that things are understood, even what is meant by وَيَعُمَّ بَدَنَهُ بِالْغَسْلِ مَرَّةً. The entire body has to be covered. So it means the entire body, everything. Even if al-aqlaf is the one, we talked about that before, the uncircumcised person. That means this piece that is not cut off as a result of circumcision, this is the hashafa. In amkana shamruha. Shamr is tashmir, if to wash what's underneath it, because it's an extra skin, so it might hide underneath it. The skin that is hidden underneath might not have water in it. So if it's feasible that he would lift it to wash underneath it, so that everything is covered with water. ويرتفع, so this is the al-mujzi, which is an-niyya and saying Bismillah, and the entire body. And of course, the mouth and the nose is part of that, part of the ghusl, because it's also part of the wudu. He says, وَيَرْتَفِعُ حَدَثٌ, and the same thing if a person, for example, jumps into the ocean or a pool or whatever with the intention of ghusl, and he says Bismillah and immerses his head and everything underneath one time, that is sufficient. With the madmada wal istinshaq, with the mouth and nose. Then he says وَيَرْتَفِعُ حَدَثٌ قَبْلَ زَوَالِ حُكْمِ خَبَثٍ. This is in general in wudu and ghusl. وَيَرْتَفِعْ حَدَث. As we said, what's the hadath? The hadath is صفة حكمية. This is a ruling, not a physical impurity, right? Al-khabath is the physical impurity. So from the very beginning when we talked about the tahara, so we have to, every time we see the hadath, we should differentiate it from al-khabath. So يرتفع حدث قبل, before زوال حكم خبث. What does that mean? If someone has impurity on his body, physical impurity, and he did not remove it first, he just made wudu, and while he's making wudu, he removed the impurity, his wudu is valid, no problem. If he made the wudu, did not remove the khabath till after the wudu is finished, is the wudu valid? Yes. So if he made wudu and after he intentionally or unintentionally, doesn't matter, and after he finished the wudu, the najasa, say for example, was on his knees, so he made the wudu and then after that he removed the najasa, washed the najasa, removed it and washed it, his wudu is valid. The same thing with al-ghusl. So that's why he mentioned here وَارْتَفِعُ حَدَثٌ قَبْلَ زَوَالِ حُكْمِ خَبَثٍ, before the removal of the ruling of al-khabath, which is the physical impurity. Then he says, this is on page 155, وَيُسْتَحَبُّ سِدْرٌ فِي غُسْلِ كَافِرٍ أَسْلَمْ وَحَائِضٍ. A sidr is this plant that has a strong smell to it. It's recommended in ghusl of a kafir became a Muslim. We talked about a kafir becomes a Muslim. It's recommended that he takes a shower, or it's obligatory to take a shower, but not to be delayed. It's recommended because there's a hadith about it that he would use sidr. He would use sidr because it has a nice, a pleasant smell. So as we say, the ghusl is تعميم البدن بالماء, is that you cover the whole body with water. You don't have to use shampoos or soaps or anything, right? This is ghusl. It's like you're making wudu. So that's why if the norm of the people when they make ghusl, they would use shampoos and soaps and things like this, but it's not necessarily something that is religiously to be mentioned. So, but specifically in ghusl al-kafir, if he becomes a Muslim, it's mentioned that he would use these things. So to use soap to clean himself with something that would remove a bad smell normally. وحائض, and the same thing for the woman in the ghusl of the menses, after she finishes the menses, is that she uses either sidr or again shampoos, soaps, so that she would have a pleasant smell. And more for the حائض. وأخذها مسكا تجعله في قطنة أو نحوها, and she takes musk, perfume. تجعله في قطنة, she puts it in a piece of cotton, أو نحوها, or the like of it, anything else. وتجعلها في فرجها, and she would clean her private part with it, so that again no unpleasant smell remains there. And there's a hadith about this. This is something recommended as long as it's not harmful. فإن لم تجد فطيبا, if she doesn't find misk, then طيب, any طيب. A طيب is the fragrance or perfume. فإن لم تجد, if she doesn't, فطينا, then mud, meaning they would use that to remove the smell. So again, these things is not a matter of ibadah. It has to be done, that you go get mud and you use it. No, it's about removing the smell, using something that would make the smell pleasant, and not to keep the smell of the blood of the menses. So this is special with the ghusl of al-kafir if he become a Muslim, and the ghusl of al-haid. Clear? ويتوضأ أو يتوضأ based on the عطف on the what's before بمد. Now how much to make the wudu using what? He says ويتوضأ بمد. The wudu is sufficient to use mud, and al-mud is the 2 handfuls of water of a normal size of a hand, right? So this is sufficient. Istihbaban, that means this is recommended that way. This is what's recommended because that's what the Prophet ﷺ, and it's in Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari, that the Prophet ﷺ كان يتوضأ بالمد, used to make wudu with the amount of water that is equal to al-mud. ويغتسل بالصاع. الصاع is 4 mud. So, and when someone asked, but I have a lot of hair, he says the one that was kana ash'ar mink, someone that has more hair than you, was sufficient for him, right? So this is sufficient. ويتوضأ بمد استحبابا, recommended. والمد رطل وثلث عراقي ورطل وأوقيتان وسبع أوقية مصري وثلاث أواق وثلاثة أسباع أوقية دمشقية وأوقيتان وأربعة أسباع أوقية قدسية. So all of the different ways of volume, and I think I have it. I don't have it with me here, but it's something that you would get the sanad for it. You would receive it. I have one where the sheikh would give you the sa', and it's with chain of narration, the saw of the people of Al-Madinah. And the same thing with Zakat al-Fitr. This is how it's a volume. So it's that big, that, and it's wide on the bottom and narrow on the top. And it has a specific measure to it. And they would give it from one generation to the other like this. So this is a saw, which is وهو أربعة أمداد. أربعة أمداد doesn't have to be precisely, of course, with this. And of course, with Zakatul Fitr, you would have the equivalent of weight with the different types of grains. So it becomes easy, inshallah. So here, this is al-mud, with all these different in their time, in Egypt, Iraq, Damascus, Quds, different ways of volume measures. They're all the same. ويغتسل بصاع, and he takes a shower with a صاع. الصاع وهو أربعة أمداد. 4 أمداد, 4 mud. وإن زاد جاز. And if a person uses more, it's permissible. لكن يكره الإسراف ولو على نهر جار. But it's disliked to make إسراف, to be excessive. And al-israf is disliked. This is again the hukm in the madhab here, that al-israf is makruh. Right? So because the way to make sure that what's the limits of al-israf is not something that is, you can easily, precisely say what's more than that is israf. So that's why it's in the level of makruh. ولكن يكره إسراف. الإسراف ولو على نهر جار. Even if it's on a running river, a person should also use what is sufficient. The hadith that is mentioned in that in Sunan Abi Dawud is not authentic. It's weak. And you'd find many of the masajid, they hang this hadith on the wall in wudu, that the Prophet ﷺ, he forbade al-israf in wudu, even if you are making wudu from a running river. But the hadith is weak. But it's the understanding of it is correct. It's to be away from al-israf. ويحرم أن يغتسل عريانا بين الناس. Now يحرم. This is haram. أن يغتسل, that he would make غسل عريانا, naked, بين الناس, among the people. Whether it's men or not men, it doesn't matter. It's not permissible, of course, because the hadith and to guard one's awrah. بين الناس, so this is haram. وكره خاليا في الماء. And it's makruh to also to make ghusl without any clothes when a person in the water, meaning in the outside in the water and no one is around. So if someone goes to a river or even he has a pool outside and to be without clothing, it's makruh in the outside, even if he's alone. But if it's in a bathroom, if it's in a building, then it's okay, of course, as long as it's not among the people. The makruh here is khaliyan fil ma'. So fil ma' here is not in the bathroom. It's in the outside, but in the water outside. That's makruh only. And because it's closer to, someone might see or like this. فَإِنْ أَسْبَغَ بِأَقَلٍ. So now he says, فَإِنْ أَسْبَغَ بِأَقَلٍ. When we talked about the amount, if the full wudu was made with less than what's mentioned, المد for the wudu, الصاع for الغسل. مما ذكر في الوضوء أو الغسل أجزاء. أجزاء means will be sufficient. So there's no such a thing as this is the minimum. If it happened before less than that, sure. والإسباغ, what is الإسباغ here? The definition of it, تعميم العضو بالماء, to cover the عضو, the organ, the part of the body with water, بحيث يجري عليه, where it runs on it. ولا يكون مسحا, and it's not wiping. So that's what constitutes al-isbagh. That when you pour the water on it, the water runs on the organ. Does it have to run on every single part of it? No. Just the fact that it's running, and then with a dalk, with rubbing, you would cover the entire عضو, the entire organ, then that's sufficient. And that's isbagh. بحيث يجري عليه ولا يكون مسحا. المسح is when the water is not running on the عضو. أو نوى فإن أسبغ بأقل, or أو نوى بغسل الحدثين. Also another thing أجزاء. Two things here أجزاء. If you make إسباغ with less than what's mentioned, less than the مد and less than the صاع, أجزاء, it's sufficient. Or if he نوى بغسله الحدثين. If he has the intention with his غسل, the two حدث, the minor and the major. So he intended with the غسل that he lifts the state of the minor حدث and the major one. The wudu and the غسل. Or, this is one case. أو الحدث وأطلق. Or he intended with his غسل الحدث. That he wants to lift the حدث وأطلق, that means he left it open. Did not specify major or minor. وأطلق الحدث. He is in state where he has to make طهارة. But أطلق, that means he left it open. Whether it's wudu or غسل, he did not specify. أو الصلاة or نوى الصلاة, he had the intention of the صلاة ونحوها, reciting Quran, anything. مما يحتاج لوضوء وغسل, where it needs wudu and غسل. أجزاء عن الحدثين. That will be sufficient for the two حدث, for the wudu and the غسل. So here if he نوى بغسله الحدثين أو الحدث وأطلق أو الصلاة ونحوها. The problem is if a person makes intention of wudu, then does it suffice for the ghusl even if he pour water on his body? No, because his intention is wudu. The niyyah is important, and the minor does not take over the major. And to be away from the differences of opinions, a person should not make very specific intentions. Like, for example, make an intention of recommended ghusl. Don't make it very specific, like the ghusl of al-Jumu'ah. Right? The intention is to pray Jumu'ah, and don't make it only recommended. Right? If a person is obligatory upon him, someone that is making the ghusl of Jumu'ah and he's in state of janaba, what's the niyyah here? Is the ghusl of al-janaba. If you make it only for ghusl al-Jumu'ah while a person is in janaba, according to some opinion, that's not valid because it's recommended. You're making an intention for recommended ghusl. But it's valid, inshallah. But to be away from this is to always have, the intention of the higher. So the obligation, the hadath al-akbar, like this. So this is clear. Then he says, inshallah, we'll try to, if you don't mind, we'll finish the chapter. He says, وَيُسَنُّ لِجُنُوبٍ. Yusannu, that means it's recommended for a junub. وَلَوْ أُنْثَى, even if it's a female. وحائض ونفساء, and also حائض. النفساء انقطع دمهما, their blood is stopped. What's يسن here? So now this is مسنون, recommended. غسل فرجه. So he says in the Zad, ويسن لجنب غسل فرجه. It's recommended, it's from the sunnah for the junub to wash his private part. And in the Sharh he says also the junub, whether it's male or female, or حائض النفساء, their blood is finished. غسل فرجه, to wash their private parts. لإزالة ما عليه من الأذى, to remove what's on it from الأذى, from the impurities or not clean things. And al-adha is different than al-najas. Al-adha is the non-clean things, which is not necessarily najas, because al-mani tahir. Al-mani is not najas. He says, وَيُسَنُّ لِجُنُبٍ غَسْلُ فَرْجِهِ وَالْوُضُوءُ لِأَكْلٍ. It's recommended for the junub to make wudu. Okay, now here this is, the junub is not going to take a shower. He's going to delay his shower. Right? So it's recommended if he's going to delay the shower, that he washes his private part, to make wudu if he wants to eat and if he wants to sleep. So وَالْوُضُوءُ لِأَكْلٍ وَنَوْمٍ. وَالْوُضُوءُ لِأَكْلٍ وَشُرْبٍ, as he says in the Sharh, وَشُرْب, and drinking. لقول عائشة رضي الله عنها رخص رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم للجنب إذا أراد أن يأكل أو يشرب أن يتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة. That the Prophet ﷺ gave the excuse, the break, the permission for the junub, if he wants to eat or drink, that he makes the wudu of the salah. He says رواه أحمد بإسناد صحيح. So regardless of where the hadith is in, but some authenticated it, so it's recommended for a person to make wudu for eating if he's going to delay his shower. وَنَوْمٍ, and also if he wants to sleep without making ghusl of al-janab. لقول عائشة كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا أراد أن ينام وهو جنب غسل فرجه وتوضأ وضوءه للصلاة. يكون متفق عليه. The Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام, whenever he want to sleep while in state of janaba, he would wash his private part and make wudu of the salah. That does not change the state of the janaba, but it, as mentioned before with the masjid, it takhfif, makes it lighter, so that the person, if he wants to sleep. And of course, it's best, of course, to remove the janaba as soon as the person can. But you can imagine when there's no enough water and cold and has to be heated, things like this. ويكره تركه لنوم فقط. ويكره ترك what it's disliked to leave the wudu لنوم فقط, for only sleep. So if that means if a person doesn't make the wudu for eating and drinking, it's not makruh, but for the sleeping, yes. He says ويسن أيضا غسل فرجه ووضوءه ويسن أيضا here in the زاد ولمعاودة وطئ. So that means going back to the previous ruling here, that it's also recommended to wash the private part and to make wudu لمعاودة وطئ. If a person wants to repeat the relations, to do more of the relations with his wife. What? لحديث إذا أتى, there's a hadith إذا أتى أحدكم أهله ثم أراد أن يعاود فليتوضأ بينهما وضوءا فإنه أنشط للعود. He says here the hadith, if one of you أتى أحدكم أهله, one of you goes to his family, meaning with relations, ثم أراد أن يعاود, then he wanted to do it again, فليتوضأ بينهما وضوءا, so let him make between the two wudu, make another wudu. He says رواه مسلم وغيره. وزاد الحاكم, and the حاكم has an extension, فإنه أنشط للعود, because أنشط, more energetic for the repeat or for the second time. والغسل أفضل, and of course الغسل is better than just the wudu. He says وكره الإمام أحمد. So all of these are clear. So it's sunnah, it's recommended if a person would delay the ghusl, is to wash the private part and to make wudu for eating, drinking, and sleep, and mu'awadat wad. The last point here is وكره الإمام أحمد بناء الحمام. Now, since the ghusl is mentioned, so al-hammam is the place, the public places of ghusl, not the public bathroom. Al-hammam, if it's mentioned in the books like that, it's not the place where people go to urinate, or no, it's the public showers basically to just to make ghusl. So كره الإمام أحمد بناء الحمام. He disliked building the hammam for someone to do it. Why? Because this is most likely that people might not adhere to the rules and awrat are exposed, so it's not a good thing for a person to be in that business basically. وكره الإمام أحمد بناء الحمام, not the private hammam for one's home. No, this is the al-hammam here in the books of the fiqh refers to the public. وبيعه, and selling it, وإجارته, and renting it. وقال في من بنى حماما للنساء, and he said with regards to someone build a hammam to women, ليس بعدل, he's not someone of righteousness. Al-adl is just, but it refers to the religion of the person. He's not a religious person, because women are forbidden to go to the hammam. For men, it has to be with the condition that it's not everybody's in front of everyone and things like this. Awrat is to be protected. But for women, it's not permissible because of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, that a woman, she should not take her clothes off outside of her house, and especially with the hammam, even if it's for the women. And unless it's a very strict situation, but I know because some people might ask, women should be very careful with these matters and to avoid this, but rather to be in separate rooms and not openly or public places. That's why, for example, gyms and things like this, people have to be away from these types of things in front of everyone. He says, وَلِرَجُلٍ دُخُولُهُ بِسُتْرَةٍ. For a man, it's permissible to enter بِسُتْرة, by being covered. مع أمن الوقوع في محرم, with being safe from falling into any haram. And one of the haram is that people are not covering their awra, and they think that this is okay to be like that among one another. ويحرم على المرأة بلا عذر, and it's haram for the woman unless there's an excuse. She has to, or something that's a different situation. ويحرم على المرأة. So it's for men, it's permissible if everything is safe and there's no sins. And for the woman, no, it's not permissible unless she has an excuse. And there's difference, of course, between the two levels of rulings here. So it comes with that under this meaning, again, does not mean necessarily in many places these public places where they take showers, but in gyms and things like that, people should observe the same rulings. Wallahu a'lam. So this is the end of it, inshallah. So we'll read it one more time. We'll read the Z first, which go back to 153, only in red. وَالْغُسْلُ الْكَامِلُ أن ينوي ثم يسمي ويغسل يديه ثلاثا وما لوثه ويتوضأ ويحثي على رأسه ثلاثا ترويه ويعم بدنه غسلا ثلاثا ويدلكه ويتيامن ويغسل قدميه مكانا آخر. والمجزئ أن ينوي ويسمي ويعم بدنه بالغسل مرة ويتوضأ بمد ويغتسل بصاع، فإن أسبغ بأقل أو نوى بغسله الحدثين أجزأ. ويسن لجنب غسل فرجه والوضوء لأكل ونوم ولمعاودة وطئ. And then you have the sharh. We stop here, inshallah. Any questions? Make sure that every word is clear. The attendance code is al-ghusl al-kamil. So this is right before the bab of at-tayammum. So since there won't be classes in Ramadan, inshallah, so hopefully, inshallah, we'll have the test after Ramadan all the way till here. And take your time, inshallah ta'ala, in reading it over and over again, especially with the Z, inshallah. And if you have any questions, make sure that you ask, inshallah. طيب, question for bathroom with sink of making wudu. Toilet is in the same place, no door curtain. If the lid of toilet is closed, is it okay to say Bismillah or Allah's name in that place, or for starting the wudu in the sink? As we talked about that before, of course it's best if a person goes out and say Bismillah. But and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, as some of the ulama, they said, since the way that the bathrooms even nowadays are completely different than how it was before, if the toilet is flushed, there's no najasa anymore, right? So it's not a place of najasa. So if a person, since Bismillah is obligatory according to the madhab, and it's to be away from the difference of opinions to say Bismillah, so if you have a choice whether not to say Bismillah or to say Bismillah in the bathroom, say Bismillah in the bathroom. So don't miss saying Bismillah. So you say Bismillah in this case, but as long as actually it's not just about, you don't have to cover the lid, but it has to be flushed. So there's no najas. And to say Bismillah so that the person does not miss saying Bismillah before wudu. And the same thing with the ghusl. And Allah knows best. Is covering the whole body with water with madmada and istinshaq sufficient for ghusl after janaba? Yes. The sufficient al-ghusl al-mujzi, what is sufficient, the fard as they call it also, is to have the niyyah, of course, and to say Bismillah, and to cover the whole body with water, and madmada and istinshaq. That is sufficient. Is showering without clothes in private makruh? The correct opinion, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, it's not makruh if it's in private in a room. So at home, you have the bathroom. So this is not makruh, inshallah. But what's makruh if it's alone outside? Alone outside. If it's outside and you're alone, that's makruh. If it's in front of people, that's haram. التعري بصفة عامة to be without clothes in general, even if you're at home and you're alone, this is something that is not something to be done. It's makruh, it's disliked. Is it allowed to wash the face with soap while performing wudu? Yes, it's allowed as long as the soap is not the, which is maybe difficult to even imagine that. Like the soap, if a person say, for example, put soap instead of washing the face, and then after that he finished the wudu. Like what I'm saying is, I'm just imagining a way like, to understand the principle of it. If someone makes wudu, washes the hand, made madmada and istinshaq, and then put soap, not wash the face, just put soap, like this, right? And then wash the arm, and then go back and wash the face. No, because the tartib has to be there. So if in this case he put soap on the face, he has to wash it then before he washed the arm. So the face has to be washed in order. In the Gulf countries, there are a lot of Moroccan baths for women. Is it still not allowed for women to go? This issue is really something that women should stay away from. And it's, as we heard, يحرم على المرأة بلا عذر. Because of the hadith of the Prophet عليه الصلاة والسلام إذا خلعت المرأة سترها أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, if a woman removes her clothes outside her home فقد هتكت ستر الله عليها أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام, that means she broke the sitr, the concealment of Allah on her. On her. It is not permissible for a woman to take her clothes off outside of her home unless there's a reason for it, and everything is protected and things like this. So this is something to be avoided unless there is udhr. There is no mean for a person to clean themselves except in these places. And with all measures are to be taken care of, then it's okay in this case, wallahu a'lam. When to use miswak before, during, or after wudu. The siwak, the hadith, أمرتم بالسواك عند كل wudu. لولا أن أشق على أمتي. If I would not make it difficult for my ummah, I would command them to use the siwak by the wudu, which is right before the wudu, before you start the wudu. And some said before you start the madmada, before you make the madmada, which is fine. If you wash the hands and then you make the siwak, and then you start the madmada and istinshaq, that's fine, or before washing the hands. So right before, in the beginning of the wudu. Is it allowed to talk during the wudu? Yes, it does not invalidate the wudu, even though it's best that a person doesn't. As the Prophet ﷺ, when someone said salam to him, he replied after he finished. But it does not invalidate the wudu. Talking in the bathroom while going, first of all, if a person is in the bathroom relieving himself, it's not permissible to talk unless it's a necessity or there's a valid reason he speaks. And there's a hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala hates for two men sitting al-gha'it, relieving themselves, talking to each other. Sometimes people do these things in public bathrooms, for example. That's not permissible. But in the bathroom, while a person is just standing or making wudu, if he speaks, it's okay, inshallah. It's best to avoid it. But it's of a lesser degree than while relieving oneself. inshallah. بارك الله فيكم. صلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وصحبه وسلم. سبحانك اللهم ربنا بحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك.